After helping hundreds of expats find rentals in Cuenca, we've seen every trick landlords use. This video will show you many of these tricks so you can avoid paying more than you need to. And yes, we'll share with you our approach to working with landlords that charge too much. We'll also introduce you to an attorney that we use for rental contract reviews to get her input on what landlords can and cannot do legally. Vamos! I'm joined by Esteban, the rentals manager at YapaTree. Together we've helped hundreds of expats make a successful transition to Cuenca. I consider Esteban to be one of Cuenca's best rental agents. He's honest, hardworking and knowledgeable, which is why we've been working together for years. Welcome Esteban, let's dig right in. One of the issues that we're seeing pop up more and more amongst expats are rental prices. In particular, how they've increased over the past few years. Now, whilst they haven't increased to the same degree as other countries, there has still been a noticeable increase in Cuenca, and so I'm just interested in your thoughts as to why.
Okay, so we have different reasons why the rental prices have been increasing lately. One of them is security in the whole country. You know, so Cuenca is still the safest city in Ecuador, but the reality is that Ecuador in general is facing some issues regarding security now. So now we have a lot of people, a lot of demand of tenants coming from the big cities. Mm-hmm. While before we had people, mostly students for small towns or rural areas coming to Cuenca to study, for instance. So that didn't impact a lot in the rental prices because they were looking for more affordable apartments or units. But now we have people from Quito and Guayaquil, and usually these tenants are used to higher standards. Mm-hmm. Let's say that way. So they are looking for high quality properties, and usually their occupation, you know, in the market, they're, I don't know, let's say they're the general managers of a bank, you know, so they have these high level paid jobs. Yeah. So they're used to that and they're willing to pay more.
Okay, so there is a lot of demand obviously coming from the other cities, Quito, Guayaquil, other parts of the coast, and that's in addition to the demand from the expats as well, because obviously, you know, expats still want to move here, they still want to rent. Actually, I'm seeing that more expats at the moment are kind of deciding they want to rent before buy, you know, partly because of that uncertainty, I guess you would say, in the market. But the other issue that I am seeing around prices, at least one of the drivers, seems to be the shift. And I think they're kind of related to the locals coming to Cuenca, and that shift is around the type of investor, the type of homeowner. So previously, there wasn't really a lot of, you know, professional property investors. Let's call it that way. Mm-hmm. But now I am seeing a little bit more of an influx in people that are saying, okay, I'm not just trying to rent out my property because we own it and I'm just trying to get a little bit of money. It's no, that they're really looking to maximize their rental yields in certain areas. And so I think that is having an impact, but can you just give me your flavor on how that is impacting the market right now?
Yeah, sure. So as you pointed, yes, before, you know, we had a different kind of owners, you know. So we had, for instance, if I had a home or my parents had a home, they wanted to rent it out because they were traveling, I would just rent the home, you know, and the price will be based on what we are expecting, but not so professional. Let's, you know, just call it that way. So now it's all about numbers. Yeah. If you buy a property, if you're from Quito, from Guayaquil, or you're an expert, you buy a property, you know how much are you paying for the property, then you based your income or your return on the rent that you can get of the property. So everything is about numbers now. Yeah, got it. Well, before, you know, it was different. It was not so professional. Sure.
No, I understand. And so obviously if a landlord's really trying to maximize their rental yields, they're going to be more likely to try and push the rental price up and see what the market will bear. And at the moment, they are having some success because of the additional demand that's there.
Exactly. So it's about to cover, I would say that most owners, they don't want to cover the whole monthly value they have to pay for the property, you know, but probably 80% of it.
Got it.
So if you just add up numbers and you say, look, I paid this for my property, I need to pay this monthly for it. So 80% of it, which I'm comfortable with, will be this much.
So you're saying if the owner, for example, has a loan,
Yeah, exactly.
all those expenses that they're trying to recoup as much as possible, which from their point of view makes sense.
Which makes a lot of sense. But the difference is that before we didn't have that much of that culture.
Sure.
So that's the main difference.
So everything's
right
becoming a little bit more professional. And so like our role as an agent really does mean that we're always balancing the needs of landlords and tenants. And so this can be quite difficult because both parties obviously want the best outcome for themselves. Now, how do we in practice tread this fine line to ensure that landlords we represent aren't overcharging tenants?
So the main thing is that because we reject a lot of listings monthly because of this reason in particular, overpricing. So at the end, what I explain to our landlords is, look, a rental property is a good investment if you have the property rented, which it sounds a little bit silly, but in the reality, most landlords, they want to spend a lot of money because they say, look, I want to have this money monthly. Okay, you can have the money monthly, but what if your property sits on the market for 3 months? Then you have lost a lot of money already. So what I always suggest is, look, we just try to reduce the rent, but you want a tenant that stays the longest possible. So you don't, give, or you don't have a different tenant any new year, and then you have to pay, the agents, you need to pay out. So
you're basically picking up on this, newfound, professionalism in the market, let's call it that, and trying to maximize, again, their rental yields with minimizing the vacancy rate. So that does make a lot of sense to me. But I know that we do reject a lot of listings, for that reason. And I know that we push back against landlords, but I also am aware that a lot of, and this is what I want your feedback on, is we push back, but I get the overwhelming feeling that most of the market simply doesn't have that luxury to push back because they need those listings. And so they're basically willing to say, okay, landlord, whatever you say, landlord, I don't want to risk losing out on this commission, therefore I'm going to try and rent a $800 property at $1,200. Is that what you find in market, or how do other agents approach this particular problem in Cuenca? Because we approach it a little bit differently, I believe.
Yeah, so that's the thing. We reject the listing. We reject the listing because of that reason. But there is just us, For one person that reject the listing, there are 10 other agents that will accept the listing.
Sure.
So that's hard to deal with.
So we're just one player in the market here.
Exactly.
And we obviously can't change the entire market alone in terms of the fairness side of things. But that is our approach, and it is a consideration of ours, and we do actually try. Let's hear from an attorney, Sabrina Candela. Thanks for joining us, Sabrina. Please just quickly introduce yourself.
Okay, Jason. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. My name is attorney Sabrina Candela. I have been an attorney for the expat community for the last 5 years, and I mostly do and I specialize on the area of civil law with special emphasis on contract law, and I do a lot of real estate transactions from purchase to lease agreements and anything that has to do with property. So I'm very happy to be here to talk about lease agreements today.
Awesome. So we actually connected with you, right? We wanted to do a lease agreement, or we had a lease agreement, and they wanted to have it reviewed by their attorney, which happened to be you. And so we got to know each other a little bit, and now we're doing a video. So fantastic. And the first question is more around the regulation side of things. So I think it is fair to say that real estate regulations in Ecuador are definitely on the looser side, right? And there are always talks of tighter regulations, especially when it comes to real estate, but we really don't have any substantial changes, and I can't see tighter regulations happening anytime soon. So I guess when it comes to setting the rental prices, what regulations do exist here in Cuenca?
Okay, not only in Cuenca, but in all the country, we majorly have 2 specific regulations that are contained on the tenancy law, in Spanish, ley de inquilinato. So we have Article 17 that basically says that the maximum of rent that someone can charge would be equivalent to the 12th part of the 10% of the government price of the property and the property taxes. Okay, so now is this an important limit? I would say that commercially, no, because the truth is the government prices for properties are usually very high. So, for example, here in Cuenca, the 12 part of 10% of the price, governmental price of the property, plus property taxes in the most used neighborhoods like Puertas del Sol, Primero de Mayo, Ordóñez Lazo, will go average to $2,000 a month on the legal limit after we do the math and apply this formula. Okay, we have a second regulation that it's on Article 19 and Article 10 of the law that says that the authority in the country that can set the maximum or the specific price that can be charged for rentals or monthly rents of a property, it's the municipality of the correspondence city where the property is located. In Cuenca, it will be the municipality of Cuenca. But the municipality will usually observe the formula that we have just discussed, which, as I just said, usually sets a very high rent
Got it.
anyway.
So you're saying that, let's take, we're going to go through an example, and I think that's going to be very helpful. But you're saying there's effectively two mechanisms here, and which one overrides the other, so to speak? So
the municipality will use and respect the formula. So they are in the same level. And especially, not all of the property would have their certificate of price set by the municipality, because usually landlords do not register their properties on the municipality office for rentals. Okay, so there will not be any difference between the formula and the municipality other than a little adjustment for the conditions of the property, but it's not really important.
So for the average person out there that's thinking, okay, I want to make sure that my landlord's not charging me more than what is legally allowed.
Yes.
How can they do that? Is there a website that they can access, or how do you suggest someone goes through that?
If the property has been registered by the landlord on the municipality, which is a rare thing, they will be able to go online and download the certificate of month rent valuation, and there they will be able to see it. But let's go to the most common case, those landlords that have not registered the property. You would need to get the information to be able to apply the formula that we just discussed about. And it was basically, as you may remember, the official governmental price of the property set by the municipality and the property taxes.
So let's go through an example right now of how we can find the legally permissible maximum rent for basically any property in Ecuador.
Okay, so here in the phone, what I will show you online won't allow you to get the piece of information directly, but I will show you how you can get the two elements that you need to then apply the formula that we have already discussed about. So here you go to Municipio Online, okay, and you open the web page, and first we would get the government appraisal, okay, that we need to use for the formula, or the government price of the property on Informe Predial. For this, you would need either the clave catastral, which is a code that identifies the property, or the cedula or RUC of your landlord. So we'll do an example here with the cedula, and we do generar informe predial, and we will get an informe predial here that at the very end will show you the appraisals. Okay, so this is the appraisal of the land and the appraisal of the construction. You add up those two figures and you would get the government appraisal or price of the property that you will need to use for the formula, and then get the price of rent. And the other thing that you will need is the tax. Okay, the property tax. For that, you go to Impresión Descarga de Cartas de Pago. You click here. Again, you would need the cedula, consult, and here we will be able to get the property tax, the payment that was done. Okay.
So there's two payments there, both appropriate, or is one for 1 year?
This person has two properties. So here we are seeing two properties. Okay. And you can see the value of the property tax that this person have paid. And with that and the other value that we have seen, you add that together, and the 12th part of the 10% of those numbers, it's the maximum legal rent. Now we will do an example of how to apply the formula based on the numbers that we have already gotten for a property in the municipality. So the property governmental appraisal or price was 100 average, okay, $136,000, okay, and average the property tax was $2,000, okay. So we obtain a total of 138 that we will need to get the 10% off, okay, and we have to divide this by 12. So for the property that we just saw, the maximum legal rent will be $1,150.
Okay, so the end result was that particular property can't be rented for more than $1,150. But, and there's a big but, right?
Yeah.
That's effectively the base rate. So let's say it's a condo. Let's say you're renting a condo that's furnished. Let's say you're renting a condo that includes utilities. All of those things are separate to this. Is that correct, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. The formula only considers the rent of the physical space, okay, of the unit or the house. But if you are offering additional benefits such as furniture or paying for homeowners association, the landlord paying for homeowners association, or utilities, all of those can be added on top. Okay. Now we have to remember the figure that we just came up with. That's the maximum that can be charged for the unit, okay? And then again, all those benefits can be on top. Now, if the landlord wants to rent for less than the maximum and then add all of those things, the final price may be less than what the government says, or maybe more, okay? But we have to make sure that we divide things clearly so that the unit it's not being rented for more than the maximum.
Got it. And look, the reality is that it is very rare in my experience that the maximum rental amounts, they're actually quite generous from what the government regulations provide. So it's actually very rare that you actually come across a landlord that's charging more just because those limits are really quite high.
That's correct. I will say that in the practice, those legal limitations don't really affect the commerce prices because they are usually less than the high prices that the municipality sets for the properties and the tax property.
Got it. So the bottom line is it's very unlikely that even if you do think that maybe you're paying a little bit too much, it is still very unlikely that the landlord is actually charging too much according to the law.
Exactly.
That's not to mean that it's okay to price above the market, but those are two very different considerations.
There you go. Market price and legal price are two different things. So again, it's really difficult that a landlord will charge an illegal, excessively high price, but it can be very excessively high compared to the market in Cuenca.
Yes, it's very unlikely that they're going to be charging more than what is legally permissible, but let's take that use case that the landlord is. We've gone through the exercise and they're charging too much. What can a tenant or potential tenant do about it?
Okay, so Article 19 of our tenancy law says that there is a legal action, a judicial courthouse action that you can do or you can start in front of a civil judge to get a fine to your landlord. Okay, so this article imposed a fine equivalent to 1 monthly rental rate that was being charged, excessively charged. And in addition to that, on a separate judicial courthouse, you have the right as a tenant that once you get a positive ruling on this first case and the judge determines that yes, the rent charge was over the law, it was illegal, and your landlord gets fined, then you have the right to get the amount exceeding the legal amount paid back to you with interests. Okay? Right. But you have to be willing to start to legal process at courthouse, hiring a lawyer.
I was going to say, how much is that going to cost? And ultimately, is the tenant likely to come out in front financially, especially going through the process, paying the legal fees? In your experience, what tends to be the outcomes there?
Usually the outcome is that what the tenant gets back, even with interest, is just a little over the emotional, economical expenses, so it's not really worth. I will say it's not really worth, but the legal action, it's there for those that want to take it. Some people don't really care about getting back their money. They care about fairness, and they care about,
I was going to say, so obviously we're talking about the civil remedies, but are there criminal remedies in these types of circumstances?
No, these won't be criminal. Okay. Unless, someone was fooled and there was a scam or something.
And you can prove that that was the case.
Exactly. And it's important to say that the limitation period for this is 2 years. Okay, so if you wait more than that, then you don't even have the possibility.
So that's good to know. So that's obviously from a legal point of view, but the other aspect is the trying to base the price on what the market will bear. And the unfortunate scenario that a lot of expats find themselves in is that they find themselves sometimes as being targeted, and they do get charged a separate amount compared to what a local might get charged. So you call it gringo pricing, call whatever you want to call it, but we do see that a lot, basically charging one price to locals, another price to expats. Is that legal? I'm assuming no, but so two things. Yeah, is it legal? And if it is, not technically legal, how does that exist in the market, and what can people actually do about that?
Well, the truth is that as long as the landlord doesn't exceed the legal limits that we have just been discussing during this whole video, it will be legal to charge whatever they want to charge to either expats or Ecuadorians. We do have a constitutional right of non-discrimination, and this could be considered discrimination, but because in property law you have a broad faculty as owner to do what you want with your property and to charge how much you want. As long as you respect those limits, it won't be considered a constitutional violation of a right.
So you can technically discriminate, and that's okay, because I'm kind of lost with that part. So yeah, I know we have the constitutional right discrimination, and that's fantastic, but why doesn't that apply to the rental situation?
Because we're talking about a property right that the landlord has, and within the property right you have the right to use and profit from your property however you want, as long as you respect the regulation. In this case, the only regulation will be the legal limit of rent that we know it's usually more than what the market even says, and that what a person will get charged. So it won't be considered a discrimination because of this private right that the property owner has to set a rent.
Got it. That's very helpful for that. Thanks. It's unfortunate, but it sounds like there's not much we can do about it in this circumstance. Let's go through some of the contract clauses to watch out for when it comes to pricing. But before we do, where can viewers learn more about their general rights and obligations as a tenant in Ecuador? So, for example, is there one main set of laws that tenants should be privy to, or what do you suggest there?
So in Ecuador, there are only basically two laws that regulate lease agreement. There is the tenancy law, which is the ley de inquilinato, and also our civil code, Código Civil. So just we'll take a very quick online search. You look ley de inquilinato Ecuador PDF online, and you would automatically get it. It's important that you do this research in Spanish. If you do it tenancy law, you'll probably not get anything. And then also Código Civil Ecuador PDF, and you'll get a downloadable version online, free, easily, where you can read all of those things.
Great. And are there certain sections in those that are like people should look out for? Like, are they? Look, a lot of contracts, a lot of regulations, they can be very lengthy, wordy. Especially for an expat trying to understand legal jargon in Spanish, it can be tough. So are these easy regulations to understand, or do you really need a lawyer to interpret them?
The tenancy law, it's not a very long law. It has not many articles compared to other, like the civil code that has over 3,000 articles. But it has some confusing wording. Now, regarding the pricing, they should basically stick to Article 10, Article 19, 18, and 17, on tenancy law regarding price. Then on the civil code, we have a very broad regulation of tenancy law that it's very confusing. So for that part, I would recommend to get a lawyer. For the pricing, I think with this video and the information they have now, they are experts regarding pricing. But for other very important topics of lease agreement, I would recommend that you get legal counsel.
Okay, fantastic. So we will provide a link to these laws. They aren't actually that complicated, especially the tenancy law, the Código Civil. That's a different kettle of fish.
Exactly.
But the tenancy laws, so we'll provide a link to that so you can at least have access to that. I do suggest having the Spanish version as the original, but you can just easily machine translate that into English, and maybe I'll provide a link to both actually. Now, the first clause that I do want to explore relates to the current rental price. And now, in particular, some contracts do state something to the effect that the tenant agrees that the rental price is fair and they waive their right to challenge this amount in court. So here's the clause. Now, is this clause valid? And just because it is in a contract, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is enforceable, correct?
Very interesting question. In our Civil Code, Article 11, we have a regulation there that states that anybody can renounce to the rights that they have, those that are renounceable. This is one of the renounceable rights, as long as it only obeys to his own or her own personal interests. Okay? So yeah, in Ecuador, it is legal to renounce to your rights when there is no an express prohibition to this. And also, in our law, the contracts are in the same hierarchy of the law in the legal field. You know, if we had a pyramid, contract and law are basically in the same as long as they are valid, you know, both valid. At the same time, we do have a regulation that says that in contracts you cannot have anything that is against the law. Okay, so we can have a contradiction here. If it ever ends up at courthouse, it will come to the point where regarding the specific situations of the case, you can demonstrate with either this renunciation was to your best interest in the moment where you signed the contract or not, to be able to see if it was a legal renunciation or if this clause should be considered nulled because it's against the limitations of the rental price. Okay, so it's a little, legally, it's a little complex because we do have the ability to renounce to a right, but on the contract you also have to stick to what the law says. So you would have to demonstrate at courthouse if the renunciation obeyed to your interests or not, to then determine if it is in or against.
So let's walk through an example. You know, let's say 1,150 is the legally permissible amount, and so under this example, and let's say the contract is for $800. That's the amount that the parties agreed upon for rent the place. Now that contract itself actually has this clause in there that says, this is you waive your right, and this is the fair market price. Under that circumstance, would that be potentially legal? I'm assuming it would be because the pricing doesn't go against what the law states. But you're saying that if we waive our rights and the price was more than $1,150, let's say $1,300 in rent, at that point, that clause would effectively become unenforceable because it does run against the legal provisions for the renting price. Is that correct, or am I missing something?
If you have a renunciation of rights, which again under Article 11 of our Civil Code, it's legal, and at courthouse you can, or the other party in this case, the landlord, demonstrates that you renounce your right because it was to your best interest, because it was a nice apartment, it had a great location, it was furniture, and you had a lot of other benefits on it. Whatever, it will depend on the conditions of the case. Then the renunciation will be legal. The waive of your rights will be legal, and you will lose this capacity of go and take the legal actions in Article 19 of our tenancy law. But if you can demonstrate, for example, that you only spoke English, for example, and you really weren't understanding what you were signing, or that you have been told that this price was actually within the regulations and you were fooled about those topics, then it will be against an article in your law, plus it will be not valid because you were fooled or you didn't understand, and it will not be enforceable.
Okay, so high level, on face value, if you have one of these clauses in your contract, it's not necessarily unenforceable. It's going to depend on the circumstances.
Exactly. It's complex. It sounds like a very easy question, like, is this legal or is not? It depends, especially because we have two articles that are opposite. A legal renunciation of rights in Article 11 plus a legal limit that has to be observed in contracts on Article 17 of our tenancy.
So let's say a client comes to you and this clause is in the contract. What is your general recommendation to them on this clause?
Well, it depends. It's my client, the landlord. It's my client, the
well, of course.
tenant.
We're going to assume for the sake of this video that your client is the tenant. More tenants are probably going to be watching this than landlords because they speak Spanish, not English, most of the time. So let's assume that it's the tenant. What would your general advice to them be if they come across a clause? Like, obviously, we don't want to panic from what we just heard because it may or may not be enforceable.
Exactly.
I don't want to assume how you're going to respond to this. I kind of think I know how you would respond to it, but let's hear.
Yeah. I will actually say that if you are not comfortable with the rent that you are being offered, don't even rent the place. You know, it's not a matter of this clause or not this clause, because at the end of the day, the only way you would be able to execute your rights will be to end up at courthouse. So do you really want to end up at courthouse to enforce your rights? Do you not feel comfortable with this rent? Then just let's not discuss about this clause. Let's find another place to rent. You know, in practice, you know, I'm a very practical lawyer. I don't like to. What is the point of telling to my client, oh yes, you have this right and let's eliminate this clause, if at the end of the day I know that my client will not want to go to courthouse and I won't be able to either enforce or not enforce this renunciation? It doesn't make much sense in the practice.
I agree. From a practical standpoint, it's the relationship generally between the tenant and the landlord that really, really matters. And so if you're getting stuck at this point with this sort of clause, which has a very big, you know, sort of background of
legal action.
Exactly. The whole point of it is it's focused around going to court. And that's something that under most circumstances that is definitely best to avoid. So I think that's really, really helpful that you said that. But from a practical point of view, if I see that clause in there and the landlord's not willing to get it out, then that's probably a significant red flag for that relationship, right?
Exactly. And if you see the clause and you agree with the price anyway, then you wouldn't mind, right? And if you see that clause and you do not agree with the price, then do not rent it, because at the end of the day, probably if you start saying, no, take this off or not, lower the rent, the landlord has every right, as we have already discussed, to say, you know what, I don't want to rent the apartment to you. And that's within their faculties as owner of the property. Understood.
And what about the rent increases? This is one that comes up quite a bit. It is also pretty common for landlords to include some sort of a clause that effectively limits what the future rent increase can be. Can you give me an example of this and I guess how legal that is in practice as well?
Yeah, we have an article, Article 18 of our tenancy law, that says that it's forbidden to set automatic rent increases during the first 2 years of rent, okay? So that is absolutely forbidden. Now, what I usually do, or the clause that I usually include, is that at the end of the contract, if the parties want to either renew it through an automatic renovation or through a writing notification or by writing a new contract, that the landlord has the capacity to raise the rent only based on the previous inflation rate for Ecuador, okay? I think that's pretty fair for both the landlord and the tenant. The tenant will have the security that the landlord won't be able to go crazy on an increase, and you have some sort of guarantee on the renewal of your contract. And also, the landlord will have a fair increase based on the inflation, which is more than
but this is in the original contract, correct?
On the original
so the original
contract.
You know, let's say the contract's for 2 years, then that contract we can't touch the rent, but in that contract you can actually have provisions for renewal.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's when you can say in the renewal the landlord will have the right to revise the rent and increase it based on the inflation rate. That's the kind of clause that I think it's fair for both parties and secure, but parties have the ability to say whatever they want, even to set a higher way or a different way to set the rental increase, or just to prohibit.
I was going to say the inflation, you know, that sounds pretty fair for both parties, but there is no limit. They can, as long as you agree to it and as long as it's not above, you know, the legally permissible rental amount, then they're basically good to go, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And what about deposits? This is another pretty touchy subject because there is a certain stigma out there that landlords are just never going to give your deposit back. That stigma exists. I don't necessarily agree with it. From a personal point of view, from a professional point of view, most of our tenants do get the deposits back. It's very rare that they actually don't. But Let's discuss this a little bit. Sometimes we do see landlords charge 2 months rent for the deposit. Now, 1 month in Cuenca, 1 month's rent for the deposit is the standard for most of the properties that we rent. But is it, I guess, legally allowable to do? I hope it's. I mean, I'm confident it is, because we do have some rentals that have the 2 months rent.
I hope it is too, because I have some contracts.
So we do. I'm confident it is legal, but just give me your flavor around the deposits, and especially when it comes to that tricky end, because the main conflict I see is that some advice out there is just don't pay the last month's rent and bail. Now that is obviously against all contracts. But I know exactly, and the law, but I know some expats do that because that's what works for them in the past, or it's worked from friends or whatever. So, can you just give me your advice around how you suggest, from a tenant's point of view, they approach the deposit?
Legally, we don't have any limitation regarding the deposit. Either tenancy law or civil code says this is how much it can be charged, this is the limit, this is how many monthly rent you can get. Nothing about the deposit. It is to the common practice that it's 1 month deposit, and to be honest with you, the reasons why there is usually so much problem around the deposit, it's another part of lease contracts that we can probably go over in a different video, which is what happens with the maintenance expenses and with the damages of the units for natural use or for earthquakes, things like this. And it's around this other topic that has a complete world to discuss about, where it goes down to either getting or not getting the warranty. Usually landlords will find ways to say the apartment has been damaged and therefore they have the right to keep the deposit. But if you have a clear contract, and this is something I always recommend to my clients and to everybody I talk to about lease agreement, I will say the most important reason why you want to get a lawyer when you are dealing with a lease agreement, it's this particular part. If you have a very clear contract regarding those expenses, maintenance expenses, damages of the property, whether they can use or not, or paid or not by the tenant or by the landlord, or use the warranty for these will be the key point for you to be able to get your warranty back. And if you don't get your warranty back, you will be able to enforce it in front of a judge at courthouse. So the key point here would be the contract, what the contract says, and having taken care very well of those things that I have mentioned, right? The damages, the maintenance fees, the quality or the status of the property when it's being rent, having a proper inventory, having pictures. And this is, I will say, the reason why you do want a lawyer.
I agree. So if you set up the contract correctly from the start, that's going to solve so many of your problems at the back end.
Absolutely.
But a lot of people, a lot of our tenants, sometimes they don't even read the agreement, which seems crazy because they're obviously in Spanish, but we provide it to them in English as well. But yeah, it's crazy that people don't take some of these lease agreements as seriously as they probably should, and then at the back end wonder why they don't get their deposit back because they agreed to something that perhaps they shouldn't have agreed to at the start. And so your main tip is really, I think, that is to make sure that the legal agreement is 100% not in your favor, but fair, and you're okay with it to move forward.
More than that it's really clear on those topics that I have mentioned.
What about the fair wear and tear clause? Because that seems to be a little bit of one that can kind of divide.
The what, excuse me?
Fair wear and tear. So that's what we call it in Australia. So basically the natural use of a property. Mm-hmm. So like, for example, paint just coming off the wall. That's just chipping. That's got nothing to do with you, or, walking across something, a floor that's supposed to be walked on, or having a shower.
Natural use.
Exactly.
Yeah, natural use. Well, our law, our civil code says that those maintenance, the expenses for maintaining and repairing the damage of natural use, it's called mejoras locativas, and it's actually the tenant's responsibility, not the landlord's responsibility, legally.
Yep.
In the contract, you can say otherwise, but legally, that's what would happen. And that's one of the important points why you need to get your contract.
But so that's the maintenance thing. So yeah, completely get.
For natural use.
Exactly, for just for natural use. So that's one where we do see some conflict because some landlords don't want to agree with that. I think that's very helpful because it's a big difference. Where I'm used to that. That's a normal clause in Australia, for example. I would definitely expect natural wear and tear to be in there, but here it may or may not be. So
Yeah, and many expats think, and I think that's like that in the US, they just think that the natural use, it's obviously the responsibility of the landlord, and it's obvious that if you get an apartment back that has been damaged for the natural use, that the landlord shouldn't be able to keep your deposit, but actually they are legally, because those maintenance work or expenses, called again mejoras locativas, if someone wants to look them up, they are the responsibility of the tenant, not the landlord. But again, this is a whole world that we can discuss, because what about an earthquake? What about I wanted to get something redone in the kitchen, or those are different kind of maintenance. And
there is a lot of examples that I think we can go through at some point, and I think we should dig deeper into this particular issue when it comes to deposits in a separate video. But I've really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit more, and I appreciate your expertise. I really do, Sabrina. So we're going to continue with some other aspects of rental prices with Esteban. But how can someone contact you should they want to inquire about your services as an attorney?
Well, they can contact me either by the phone or by email. I'm usually available even during weekends. I will provide you my personal information so you can put it here in the video, and I will be very happy and pleasure to assist all the expat community regarding property transactions, and now with real estate and lease agreement matters. So I look forward to working with you in the future.
Awesome, Sabrina. Thank you.
Okay.
Moving on, it is pretty common for new arrivals to have vastly different expectations than what the actual market can provide. So, for example, someone finds a $400 listing on Facebook Marketplace, and they then extrapolate that as the current price across all areas of Cuenca, and it just doesn't work like that. So can you just explain what role things like location, apartment size, and building amenities do play in the rental cost?
Yeah, so security for us is our main drive, in this process. Yeah. So we always start looking and searching and mapping everything out from a security point of view. So we see all the locations that are secure for expats, secure for everyone, but mostly, with expats, because we work a lot with the expat community. And based on that, we start looking for the properties. So of course, you can find a 400 apartment in a secure place. Yes, you can, but most of them will be probably in the outskirts of the city.
Sure.
So I'm not saying that every neighborhood at the outskirts is dangerous. It's not the case, but there are a lot of them that is, it's not appropriate.
Cuenca is relatively spread out, and so I think it's fair to say that as agents, we just don't touch parts of the city. We just don't go to those parts, not because we think they're completely horrible, but we just know that most of the clients that we deal with, not even just the expats, but the locals as well, all the tenants that we deal with, they tend not to want to be in those parts of the city. So we just tend not to target them. So ultimately, how many areas of the city would you say that we generally target when it comes to rentals?
So, in every area are different small areas. So there are a lot of areas, but let's call it that we have around 5 to 7 good areas in the city that we target because of this reason, because of security. But there's another reason, there is transportation, which is very important for the expat community now in particular. Because locals usually they have cars, they are used to the public transportation, so that's fine. But in the expat community, usually what we have seen is that you want to be as close as possible to a historical center, for instance, or to supermarkets,
And the rivers too. I find that's probably one of the biggest drivers in terms, I want a view, I want to be close to the river. Those are the two things that most expats at least are looking for.
Yeah.
And the other big thing that because of the rolling blackouts we're having right now, we are seeing this sort of unprecedented demand for buildings with generators right at this point in time. So if you're watching this video in a year's time, I hope, I really do, that it is a vastly different experience when it comes to the electricity situation here. But as of right now, there are these buildings that are attracting let's say it's a bit of a premium because they do have the generator. And as more of the older buildings start retrofitting the generators, then that's also going to add some of that supply. But at the moment, there's just not a lot of supply when it comes to buildings that have generators compared to the demand right now. And the demand's likely going to increase, at least over the short term. So my question is, what sort of a premium are you seeing right now for buildings that have the generators?
I mean, everyone is looking for apartments with generators because and that includes me, we thought that most of the apartments here have a power generator that can provide energy for the whole building. And I think you have discussed this in another video, but it's important to mention that just a few buildings provide a full electricity for the whole apartments and all of that. So now people are looking for apartments with generators, but okay, it's only for the common areas. So now it's getting smaller and smaller, and now we have just a few buildings, and
and that's very important because a lot of agents will say, it has a generator, don't worry about it, and it's only when you move in and the power goes off and your power goes off that you realize that, okay, wait, the generator's only for the communal areas or only for the elevator or something like that. And the other thing with the generators is that they do have some surcharges sometimes, right? So how much is that generally are you seeing? So what I mean by surcharge, these generators, they're backup generators, they use diesel fuel, most of them, and that costs money that wasn't budgeted in the aliquotas or the HOAs, and so there is this little bit of a push to increase, at least temporarily, whilst the generators are being used a lot.
Budgeted, but just for a short period of time. The thing is that we're experiencing now in Cuenca is never happened in decades. So that's the thing. So it's charging, let's say if your building fee, let's just put it in numbers, it's $100. Now probably $150. Because of the diesel, because of the fuel that they need. So
for me, it's reasonable. I don't think anyone's profiting off that.
No.
You do a lot from the management side of things, especially with some of the building administration. You don't see, there's no gouging going on, right?
No. People already living in the apartments, they actually are happy to pay that. They're willing to pay that.
They're transparent with the costs and all that sort of stuff too.
Exactly. So that's good. But in the rental market, it just adds value to the rent.
Got it. There is a bit of a culture in Cuenca of negotiating for pretty much everything. Except at Mega Maxi. I've tried. They don't like that too well. But how much room for negotiation is there in Cuenca rentals market? And do landlords expect negotiations, or what do you suggest?
There's a huge thing in negotiation here in Cuenca in the culture. And landlords expect always this kind of a scenario in the game. So what we usually do is we talk to the owners and to the tenants and say, look, there is a room for negotiation always. There will always be the other part trying to negotiate with you. So let's just keep that in mind, so we have both parties open to the negotiation, and then it's easy for the whole situation to get to a deal.
Great. So setting those initial expectations, I think that's what you in particular do well with the tenants that come here, because the expectations can be all over the place. It can be vastly different. We all come from different places. And so, there's going to be a bit of an expectation setting scenario there. So moving on, there are a lot of low quality agents, I would just call them, in Cuenca. And many of these do see rentals as just like an easy side gig. And the lack of licensing or other regulation makes it just really difficult for expats to know which are the better agents out there. And so what are some of the giveaways or red flags, if you will, to look out for when selecting an agent that will actually look out for your interest too and not just their own?
So it's usually about the information that you have for the property when you see the property. When you see the listing online or anywhere, if you have very poor information, probably it's because they don't care. Okay, so we'll just send a property around the market, try to get the money, and then just walk.
Got it.
So if you have a property with a lot of pictures, with a lot of details, with a lot of information and everything that is there, probably that's a good agent. So that's just the first filter.
The overall professionalism of the listing itself, that's probably an easy giveaway. You know, if that's done well, then everything else has a higher chance of being done well too.
Exactly.
What other red flags, especially around communication with agents? That's one that is one of my key issues when I'm trying to communicate with other agents.
Yeah, that's probably the one of the main issues is communication. How responsive are agents? You know, when you're dealing with them, not only with you but also in the property and with the landlord. When you meet all the parties, you have to see how the agent manages the whole situation.
Sure.
If you see that they don't care only about they don't care about you, they care more about the landlord, that's a red flag. But sometimes they don't care about any of those. You know, they just want the commission and they just walk away. So communication is a key part in this process. Yeah,
Awesome,
sure.
awesome. The other one, like the deposits, because the agents generally, sometimes they do act as a middleman in the deposit scenario. So you might be giving them the deposit and the landlord may have no idea if that deposit's actually been paid or whatever. But
And it's about transparency. So I encourage the tenants to ask as many questions as they want. You have to ask all of the questions that you have. Don't keep your questions to yourself. Ask and then see how the agent replies to those questions. How transparent is he and how knowledgeable is he about the questions.
Yeah. Some other things that I've found in the market, for example, is for me the easiest giveaway when we're looking at a listing online, if they don't include the price in that listing, this goes back to what we're talking about before, basically having dual prices or multiple prices depending on how much they think they can effectively get away with. And that is the only reason for an agent not to have the listing price. That's the way I see it, Esteban. But do you see any valid reasons for an agent not to put the listing price in one of these listings?
No, I wouldn't say there is a valid reason. I mean, you're advertising something, you have to put the price, which is the most important thing when you're seeing something, because you see the value also, you know, based on the price and what you can pay. So if you don't see a price, most likely is that they just want to catch a lot of people asking for that property because probably it's cheaper or it looks cheaper, but then they will give you different properties
They'll give that
to look at.
pricing discussion afterwards based on what they think. And we did touch on this just briefly before, but I think it's worth mentioning again, is that sometimes if we find that an agent only targets expats, you know, they don't rent to locals or whatever, they 100% target expats, then that can make themselves a big target for landlords that want to practice these types of pricing that is above the market, and they get targeted, and we get targeted because of that. So I think it's worth noting that we do have an anti-gringo pricing policy in place, but we're very much in the minority when it comes to the market. Another thing to look out for, I find, is the bait and switch. You know, this is pretty standard. Listings here in Cuenca are very hard to come by and the market moves very quickly. And so what can happen is that the agent will just try and get your attention with an old or even a fake listing. And then once they have your attention, they're going to switch it for one of their other listings. Do you find that happening in market a lot, or how do you see that?
It happens a lot for two reasons. You know, the first one is, agents usually have their listings up there just to catch new tenants, is the way they call it. But also owners, if they rent a property, we have to remember that there's an exclusivity here in Cuenca in the rental market. So various agents can have one property. So if they rent the property through a different agent, usually the owners don't let you know that the property is already rented.
Sure.
So when you're checking with your properties, of course, then you'll find out. But sometimes it can happen that you have your property that you think is still available, but sometimes it's not.
Sometimes it's genuine, right?
Yeah.
The property does literally, it's gone off the market, it's rented through another agent, and the communication isn't there. And I get that. That's one scenario. I wouldn't say that's a bait and switch. That's just genuine. The property's gone. But the actual, legitimate, actively trying to push for, let's say, a cheap listing, but then sell you something else. Do you see that happening in the market?
Yeah, I see that happening in the market a lot, and I think it's something to consider when you're looking at websites and properties, how professional you see the whole thing. It's all about professionalism, communication, the things that we already discussed.
So if you see there's a bait and switch happening to you, maybe it's genuine, but if everything else around that agent doesn't necessarily seem completely legit, then there's a chance that it's not legit either.
Exactly.
It's an actual bait and switch. So I think that makes sense. And so I think that kind of comes down to probably what I consider the most important learning is that just when selecting an agent, trust your gut. Does something feel off about the property or the agent, or maybe the agent or landlord are a little bit secretive or standoffish? In these circumstances, we would always suggest just taking a step back and reevaluating, is that property really the one for you, given those circumstances? I know it can be hard to walk away from a property that does otherwise feel perfect, but that is generally the right call if your spidey sense does start to tingle. Would you agree, Esteban?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's all about how soon you need the property. If you have some time ahead and you need to explore more options, we're very honest and say, look, this property might not be in the market soon, or might not be different properties similar to this one in the market. So if you really like the property, okay, let's find a way to get the property and see that everything is in order. We're very honest with that. But if the property, you see a lot of things, and we see a lot of things that might not go according to the plan, so then we'll suggest, okay, let's wait and see other options.
Sure, that makes sense. And any other tips for renters to ensure that they are going to pay a fair rate without overpaying here?
Well, the first thing that I already mentioned is you have to ask as many questions as you have. Ask questions about everything.
Yeah.
And also what we also do is we provide a draft for the contract that we have, because everything needs to be in the contract. So if you take a look at the contract, many things, a lot of things, not a lot, but some things may change in the contract with just personal information, details and all that. But standard is that you'll find most of your questions there. So that's a good way to go.
So definitely review the contract.
Take a look at the contract, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And that's really good, Esteban. So let's assume that someone watching wants our help to find their next rental in Cuenca. What is your process for helping renters find suitable properties with fair prices?
So let's send us an inquiry, send us your preferences at YapaTree.com. We'll take a look at where your expectations are. We'll reply back as soon as possible, and we'll set the expectations for you as well. Okay. So we'll let you know.
Awesome, that sounds really good. So they can just complete this form, and when they're about 30 days out from their preferred lease commencement date, we'll start shortlisting potential properties and arranging viewings. Yeah, that's basically the process.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So I'll provide a link to this form in the description. And if you are thinking that El Centro is where you want to be, but you don't want the noise that can come with it, then perhaps this development right here on Calle Larga and the Tomabamba River is worth checking out. We actually filmed this video in an apartment in this complex. That's all for today. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.